My name is Lieutenant Emily Grayson, United States Navy. And 3 minutes before the ceremony began, I heard my mother lean toward my aunt and say, "She's just a driver." She didn't whisper it like a secret. She said it like a fact. Like the name of a street you've driven down 100 times plain, unremarkable, forgettable. I sat 2 rows ahead, close enough for the words to reach me, far enough for her to think I wouldn't hear. But I did. Every syllable landed like a pebble, in still water, sending out ripples of memory, years of being defined by the smallest part of me. The thing is, she wasn't entirely wrong. I've driven Humvees through desert dust storms and armored convoys through city streets where every window felt like a loaded rifle. I've driven bleeding men to medevac sites and driven commanders into places they told me were too hot for a woman to be. But to her, to my family, I was still just a driver. The auditorium was humming with low-conversation families, catching up veterans, exchanging nods, a few kids restless in their seats. At the front, the Navy flag stood tall beside the American flag, both barely moving in the soft air from the ceiling vents. On stage, a row of chairs waited for the honorees. My name was on one of them, though my family didn't know it yet. I glanced over my shoulder. My brother was slouched in his seat, scrolling through his phone. My mother's mouth moved quickly, probably telling my aunt again how my job was basically chauffeuring people in uniform. I could almost hear her saying what she'd said 100 times: it's safe. She never sees real action. It's not like what her father did. I faced forward, forcing a calm breath. Because in a few moments, the man walking onto that stage, the one in dress whites with gold stripes gleaming on his sleeves, was going to change everything. And I'd let my mother's words hang in the air just a little longer, because the silence that followed was going to be unforgettable. I grew up in a house where the walls were lined with medals, plaques, and framed photos of my father in uniform. Colonel David Grayson, Army Ranger war hero, the man who seemed to define what service meant in our family. My brother Daniel was his shadow. From the time we were kids, Dad called him soldier. Me, he called me kiddo. Our dinner table talk wasn't about school or movies. It was about tactics, deployments, and who in the family had really served. By the time I was 10, Daniel was already getting Army field manuals for Christmas. I was getting new notebooks and art supplies. It's not that they were cruel, but in my family, service meant combat. And combat meant infantry rifles, boots on the ground, taking hills and holding lines. Anything else was support. And support was less. When I was 15, Daniel got to ride along in a training helicopter with Dad's unit. I remember standing on the tarmac, holding a box of donuts for the crew, watching the rotors spin up. My father stood with his arm around Daniel's shoulders, explaining how the Rangers worked. Me, I was told to keep the car running so they wouldn't have to walk far after they landed. I sat there behind the wheel of our family's beat-up Ford, feeling the low thump of the helicopter blades in my chest. I couldn't take my eyes off the way the pilots moved, confident, precise, owning every inch of that machine. That's when I realized I didn't care about carrying a rifle. I cared about carrying people, moving them where they needed to go, and making sure they got there alive. That love of driving started small. First, it was the family pickup on the back roads, then the school's old stick-shift bus. By the time I was 17, I could back a trailer into a barn in one try and thread a truck through a city alley without scratching a mirror. I knew my way around engines better than most boys in my class. Still, every time I mentioned wanting to join the military, my mother would say the same thing: "Emily, you're too soft. You'd never make it. Besides, the only thing they'd let you do is drive." She said it like it was a joke. I heard it like it was a sentence. At 19, I enlisted anyway. Not in the Army, like Dad and Daniel, but in the Navy. My mother's face when I told her was something I'll never forget, a mix of disbelief and a quiet, thin-lipped disappointment. She didn't ask what I'd be doing. She just said, "Well, I guess you'll be driving." And she was right, but she had no idea where that road was going to take me. The Navy didn't exactly roll out a red carpet for me. Boot camp was a blur of shouted orders, blistered feet, and sleepless nights where the air smelled like sweat and metal. I was smaller than most of my division, but I learned quick size mattered less than grit. When my permanent orders came through, I was assigned to a motor pool at a forward operating base overseas. My official title, Vehicle operator, tactical transport. My mother would have laughed herself breathless. In her mind, it confirmed everything. Emily Grayson was the driver. But to me, that assignment meant I was responsible for the steel beasts that kept missions moving: armored Humvees, MR apps, supply trucks. My hands learned every inch of those controls, every stubborn gear shift, every quirk in the brakes. I could feel through the wheel if a tire was a pound low or if an axle bolt was loosening. Still, the support label clung to me. At the chow hall, infantry guys would joke, "Hey, Grayson, save me a window seat on your next Uber run." I'd smile, keep my mouth shut, and file it away. The turning point came on a scorching afternoon. I was part of a convoy transporting a Navy SEAL team through a city where the walls felt too close and the windows too dark. My Humvee was third in line. The first explosion hit the lead vehicle, rocking it sideways in a cloud of dust and smoke. The comms lit up with overlapping voices, panic, and orders colliding. Our convoy commander froze for a second, weighing options. But seconds were a luxury. The street ahead was blocked, and gunfire cracked from rooftops. Instinct took over. I threw my Humvee into a tight turn, using the side streets I'd memorized from supply runs. My gunner laid down suppressing fire while I called directions over the radio. Within minutes, I had the SEALs out of the kill zone and into a secure courtyard. When the dust settled, the team leader, Commander Hayes, walked over, still catching his breath. He had that calm, assessing look I'd only ever seen in people who'd been under fire too many times. He asked my name. Then he said, "You didn't just drive. You commanded that escape." It was the first time anyone had said something like that to me in uniform. I wanted to tell my family, but when I called home, my mother's reaction was flat. "Well, you were in a vehicle. You did your job. No, I'm proud of you. No? Are you okay?" Just the same box she'd always put me in. But Commander Hayes didn't forget, and neither did I. After that convoy ambush, I started looking at my future differently. I wasn't content with just being behind the wheel anymore. I wanted to be the one planning the route, making the calls, leading the mission. But wanting it and getting it were two different battles. To move from enlisted to officer, I'd have to pass officer candidate school, a crucible that chewed up even the best and spat them out. I put in the application, knowing full well my family would laugh. And they did. When I told them, my brother grinned like he was humoring a child. "OCS. You know that's for leaders, right?" he said. My mother just shook her head. "They're going to eat you alive." Maybe they were right, but I'd survived firefights. I'd navigated cities under fire. If they thought I couldn't handle a few more months of people yelling at me, they hadn't been paying attention. OCS was worse than I'd imagined. Physical training at dawn, leadership evaluations that pitted us against each other in tactical scenarios, hours of academic work on naval strategy and ethics. Every day felt like a test I couldn't afford to fail. Commander Hayes checked in once a month, calling me from whatever corner of the world he was deployed to. He never wasted words. "Stay sharp, Grayson. People follow competence before they follow rank." Some days, his voice in my ear was the only thing keeping me from packing my gear and quitting. Other days, it was my mother's voice, the memory of "she's just a driver," that pushed me harder. I passed OCS near the top of my class. On commissioning day, I stood in my dress whites, new gold bars on my shoulders, and took the oath as Lieutenant Emily Grayson. The sun was blinding the air electric. When I called home that night, my mother's reaction was underwhelming. "So, now you're a driver with a fancier title," she said. I bit down on the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. She didn't see it, but something had shifted. I was no longer trying to prove her wrong. I was building a record that would make her opinion irrelevant. It was supposed to be a routine transport, just another convoy run, moving personnel and gear between bases. That's how the orders read anyway. But I'd been in long enough to know routine was the most dangerous word in the military. The heat that day was brutal, pressing down like a physical weight. My crew was restless, the roads too quiet. We had 2 MR apps and a Humvee mine carrying a mixed group of SEALs and Marines. Commander Hayes was riding shotgun, scanning every rooftop, every alley, like he could see trouble before it happened. And trouble came fast. Halfway through a narrow valley road, the lead MRAP's front axle blew in a flash of fire, an IED buried under the gravel. The blast shoved the vehicle sideways, blocking the road and trapping us in a choke point. Seconds later, gunfire poured down from the ridgelines. The convoy commander was hit almost immediately. Chaos rippled through the radios. I felt the old hum of adrenaline in my chest, the same one from that first ambush years ago, but now I wasn't just thinking about escape. I was thinking about how to pull every soul in my convoy out alive. I took command without hesitation. Bravo! One reverse and block the rear Charlie team dismount and return fire to the West Ridge. My voice was steady louder than the hammering of the 50 cal on our roof. While the Marines pushed back, I threw the Humvee into a side trail, a barely there goat path I'd noticed on recon. It wound up the valley wall, narrow and steep, but it offered a way around the wreck. Hayes didn't question me. He just relayed my calls, his tone crisp and certain. We leapfrogged the SEALs up the trail, switching between driving and covering fire until we could flank the shooters. Within minutes, their fire broke, and we had a clear path for medevac. When we rolled into the forward base that night, covered in dust and smoke, the base commander was waiting. Hayes walked straight to him and said, "Lieutenant Grayson commanded that run. Without her, we'd be bringing back bodies." I was awarded the Navy Commendation Medal for that day, but the bigger moment came when Hayes asked me to serve as tactical transport lead for his unit. That meant I wasn't just driving anymore. I was planning movement for one of the most elite teams in the world. I called home a week later, still riding the high. My mother's voice was cool. "So, you drove in a different direction. Good for you." Her words didn't sting like they used to, because I knew, and so did every man on that ridge, that I had led them out. The auditorium smelled faintly of polished wood and dress uniforms, that subtle mix of starched leather and aftershave that clings to every formal military event. Families filled the rows, their murmurs bouncing softly off the high ceiling. Up front, the stage was set with flags, a podium, and a row of reserved chairs for the honorees. I'd taken my seat 3 rows back from the stage, close enough to see the fine stitching on the banners, far enough to blend into the crowd until it was my turn. My name was on the program, but my family hadn't looked. Behind me, I caught the familiar rhythm of my mother's voice. I didn't even have to strain to hear it. "She's just a driver," she said to my aunt the same way she might comment on the weather. I could hear the smile in her tone, the confidence that nothing in today's event would change that. My jaw flexed, but my expression stayed neutral. I'd learned a long time ago that silence was a sharper weapon than argument. The room fell into a hush as a side door opened and Commander Hayes stepped onto the stage. Time had added a few more lines to his face, but his posture was still the same. Shoulders, squared eyes, sharp, the kind of presence that could quiet a room without saying a word. He began the ceremony with the usual acknowledgments, the veterans in attendance, the families, the honor of shared service. Then his gaze swept the crowd. When his eyes found mine, he didn't smile. "Lieutenant Grayson," he called, voice carrying effortlessly to the back row. "Lead us in." For half a heartbeat, the room was frozen. Then the entire front row of SEALs rose to their feet. One by one, more stood until the whole auditorium was on its feet, the sound of hundreds of hands coming together filling the air. I rose, my dress whites crisp under the stage lights, and walked the aisle toward him. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my mother. Her mouth slightly open, the color draining from her face. My brother's phone was forgotten in his lap. My aunt had gone completely still. As I reached the stage, Hayes stepped back, letting me take point. The SEALs fell in behind me, their boots striking the floor in perfect rhythm. No introductions, no explanations. Just the sound of respect moving as one. In that moment, I didn't need to look back to know my mother had nothing left to say. I stood at the podium, the glare of the stage lights softening as my eyes adjusted. Commander Hayes moved to my left, folding his hands behind his back, the unspoken signal that the floor was mine. He began speaking, but not about himself. "On this stage, we honor those who've led from the front, and sometimes leadership doesn't wear the face you expect. Lieutenant Grayson has commanded missions under fire, navigated convoys through kill zones, and brought every man home alive. She's not just a driver. She's the reason some of us are standing here at all. The words rippled through the audience, heavy with truth. I could see veterans in the front row nodding slowly, the kind of nod that came from understanding. Then Hayes turned toward me, and in full view of my family, of the woman who had called me just a driver that very morning, he pinned the Meritorious Service Medal on my chest. The applause rose again this time, warmer, longer, unhurried. I met my mother's eyes for the briefest moment. She didn't look away, but her expression was unreadable, a mix of something like pride, and the realization that she had misjudged me for years. I took the mic for a moment, my voice steady. They say driving isn't leadership, but every road is a choice, and every choice carries the people beside you. I've spent my career behind the wheel, not because I had to, but because I knew where we were going. Leadership isn't about where you sit. It's about where you take people and bringing them home. When the ceremony ended, I walked down from the stage with the SEALs flanking me. Hayes clapped a hand on my shoulder as we reached the aisle. "You let us in," he said quietly, "like I knew you would." I passed my family without breaking stride. Some truths don't need to be spoken aloud. Some respect doesn't require an apology. Because at the end of the day, leadership needs no introduction. If you've ever been underestimated, let this be your reminder, your rank, your worth, your impact. They aren't defined by those who doubt you. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe in honoring those who serve, subscribe so their stories keep getting told.